Hi, I'm Sandy Goldberg from Antenna Audio, and welcome to the podcast series from Emory University's Carlos Museum in Atlanta, Georgia. On each podcast, we use an object from the museum's collection to spark a conversation. This time, we've chosen an object that's just recently come into the collection. It's a cup. Well, technically, it's a cup. It's a wine cup, but it's almost the size of a small bowl. When the user tips it up to drink, it would almost cover their face. That person would have been in ancient Greek, someone who lived about 2,500 years ago. But really, it's what's painted inside that cup that's the truly fascinating part. It's a siren, a creature which made her appearance for the very first time in Homer's Odyssey and has never left our imagination. Joining us today is Jasper Gaunt, curator of ancient Greek and Roman art at the Carlos Museum, and Peter Bing, professor of classics at Emory. Towards the end of the program, we'll also hear from author Margaret Atwood. But first, pour yourself something to drink, relax, and join us. Peter, you were telling me that somehow that your daughter had something to do with the cup. Can you tell us about that? I can't imagine what you were talking about.
Oh, just that when she heard that I was going to be giving a talk about this wonderful new cup that the Carlos has gotten, and that there was a siren in it, she said, "Oh, Daddy, Sirens. What about Popeye and the Sirens?" And she immediately pulled out a DVD and showed me a tape with Popeye telling the story of Jason, the pop-eyed sailor man, being able to resist the sirens because, of course, he ate his spinach and covered his ears with the cans.
Jasper, I know you're going to describe the object for people who don't see it now on their iPods or on their computers. But before that, let's back up and just sort of set the scene a little bit for some people who don't know the basic story.
The story goes back to Homer and the tale of Odysseus. And during his journey, Odysseus passes by the island of the Sirens. And Homer doesn't really tell us very much about these sirens. He tells us that they're female, that they sing an irresistible song that draws all sailors who pass by to their deaths. There are two of them. They sit in a meadow, and in front of the meadow, along the shore, are corpses, bones with shriveled skin lying on it. Well, Circe, the sorceress, warns Odysseus about the sirens and tells him that he must make sure to fill the ears of his crew with wax so that they won't be able to hear this irresistible song. But if he wants to hear this song himself, he should have them lash him to the mast, bind him as tight as possible, and then leave his ears uncovered. We don't hear the song, and we don't actually learn what these sirens look like.
So, Jasper, 2,500 years ago, how did this person interpret the siren? What's inside?
By the time that this cup was made in the third quarter of the 6th century BC, the imagery has become very standardized, and what the ancient artists thought of when they wanted to depict a siren was a bird with outstretched wings often and a tail, and then attached at the neck is a female head, and above the neck is simply the features of a woman. And in this particular case, you can see that she's wearing even a necklace and has earrings, and the little red line in her hair is a fillet. It's a headband worn by men and women for festive occasions.
Now, I'm looking at it when you're holding. I don't want people to think we actually brought the cup in here. So we're looking at a picture of it. And she's got a beautiful face, but her head is turned 180 degrees around, and she's got rather a long neck.
That's the convention for these ones there. It goes into the convention of how you draw water birds. And there's a long and honorable tradition in Greek art of the body facing one way and the head looking around in another direction. And it's a period of Greek art before something three-dimensional in drawing has become possible, and so it's simply an attempt to, on the artist's part, to show somebody turning in space, but it hasn't been refined to a sophisticated three-quarter view yet.
Now, I know, Peter, you were talking about how there was no description in Homer, but how did artists and thinkers at the time conceive of it as a bird then? The wings are enormous. It's like a huge cloak wrapped around her. Where did the bird imagery come from?
Well, art historians have traced the iconography of the siren to the Egyptian ba bird, which is the way the Egyptians pictured the soul of a person after he had died in a bird-like form that looks very, very much like a siren. But then the question is, why is that kind of representation of a bird woman, why is that appropriate to the sirens? Well, in the Odyssey, it's their voices that reach out across the sea to the passing sailors. They themselves remain, at least as far as we can tell, stationary on their island, but their voices fly out to anyone who passes by. And the Greeks, and Homer in particular, talks in other contexts too about winged words. And I think since artists, visual artists, weren't able to represent sound directly, this was one way of conveying that idea of the sound flying out into the ears of the passing sailors.
Now, I was picturing this cup, if I was holding it, I'd have to use two hands. If it was filled up, it would be quite a large amount of wine. Now, of course, they would have mixed it with water, but nonetheless, it was a lot of alcohol to drink. So is the person who was making this, were they thinking that the drinker wouldn't see the beautiful siren until they had had their fill and were a little bit drunk?
I think so, yes. I think that you have to imagine this cup being used in sympotic contexts, and that is a drinking party, and that takes place in the evening. And these things can start before the sun goes down, but they can still be going when the sun comes up the next day. And there are descriptions of that in Plato, and the hangovers were legendary. The amount of light was very, very limited. And so the amount you would see of the decoration is at best very limited. And furthermore, most of the wine of antiquity that we know of was either red or at best fairly murky. A beautiful, clear, sparkling white is out of the question. And so by the time you fill this up, and it would be, 4 inches deep, and it's covered with a black gloss in the background. So that's sort of absorbing the light as well. I think that it would only be towards the very end, as you've begun your sea voyage as a symposiast, that, in fact, well into it, and maybe getting quite rough and boisterous, that you suddenly see the decoration in the bottom.
Now, you've just referred to the drinking as a sea voyage. Is that how they thought about it?
Yes, that's the really interesting thing, and that goes to the heart of the question of why you would place a siren in the midst of a drinking cup. Ancient Greeks conceived of their drinking parties as a journey across the sea. And like any journey, there can be smooth sailing and a safe arrival in port. That would be a party in which people drank moderately and there was no arguing or fighting or anything like that. On the other hand, such journeys, such sympotic journeys, always entailed the possibility of peril. If you drink too much, well, you might have a shipwreck. You might never make it home. You might pass out. Of course, the sirens are one of the most treacherous perils that confront the sailor Odysseus as he goes on his journey. So after draining this enormous cup, probably almost a liter of wine, there the drinker was suddenly confronted by this image of the monstrous siren.
And behind the whole idea of the cup is this association in Greek thought between wine and the sea. In Homer, the sea is so-called wine-dark or wine-faced.
Now, it's interesting you mention as a sea journey, because one thing that confuses me, I think, is in the popular imagination, when you say siren, a lot of people think of mermaids.
I think that maybe it's a post-classical thing, but there are all sorts of sea monsters from the classical world, like Triton and Scylla and so forth. And these are partly human and partly fish-tailed. But I think that the sirens are a distinct set in the ancient world, and perhaps in post-Renaissance thought they start to merge.
Right.